I want to do part 2 of my video about present tense verbs in Irish. In the last video, we talked some in general about verbs, about how verbs are words that express action or a state of being. And we also talked about how in Irish, we have the original verb, which is called the verb root, such as, for example, lay, to read, and that often has to change to a verb stem, which is a transition phase, such as lay, just le fada, and then that will turn into a final usable form by adding a suffix, such as laim, which means I read. We added I am. We also talked about the difference between broad and slender verbs. Broad verbs are verbs whose last vowel in its stem is A, O, or U, and slender verbs are verbs whose last vowel in its stem is E or I. And also, we talked about that there's two main groups of verbs in Irish: first conjugation verbs and second conjugation verbs. I focused entirely on first conjugation verbs in the last video, and we learned that they are mostly just one-syllable verbs, except for two-syllable verbs with a fada in the second syllable. And remember that a fada is one of those accent marks that you see over some letters in words. In this video, I want to talk about the second conjugation verbs. And personally, I think that this group is easier. Well, not really easier, but there's less to remember, so kind of makes it easier. Second conjugation verbs are two-syllable verbs that end in either aigh or igh, such as adwi, to admit, or jevni, to affirm or certify. And also two-syllable verbs that don't end in aigh or igh, such as fragger, to answer, and osco, to open. The verbs in that second group, they are called syncopated verbs, and they form their stem in a really unique way, and that is by sort of collapsing the verb. Now, a verb is collapsed or syncopated in Irish by removing the vowels that come between the last two consonants of the word. Bit my lip. So, for example, we have the verb oscail. That means to open, and we'll need to syncopate it or collapse it to form the stem. Well, we'll remove the vowels that come between the last two consonants to do that. The last two consonants are C and L, and that means we'll remove the A and the I, and the stem will become oscail, O-S-C-L. That's the final verb stem that we will add suffixes onto to be able to use the verb. So we have to distinguish again between broad verbs and slender verbs to know what suffix to pick to tag on the end. So now that we know all that, let's get ready to conjugate. Well, for that first group that ends in aigh or igh and is two syllables, we form the stem by dropping the aigh or the igh. What's left will be the stem. We then look at what's the final vowel in that stem, and if it's a broad vowel, the verb is broad. If it's a slender vowel, the verb is slender, and we should choose the suffixes accordingly. For the syncopated verbs, to form the stem, we syncopate them like we talked about before, and then that's the stem. We look at the last vowel in that stem, and if it's a broad vowel, then we choose a broad ending. If it's a slender vowel, then we choose a slender ending. Let's look at the endings. So if you want to say I do something, and it's a broad verb, it'll end in A, I, fada, M. It'll be pronounced im. If it's slender, it'll end in I, fada, M, still pronounced im. You, if it's broad, would be A, I, fada, O-N-N, 2. If it's slender, it'll be I, fada, O-N-N, 2. Either way, it'll sound like Ian 2. He, it'll be A-I fada O-N-N she if it's broad, and I fada O-N-N she if it's slender. She, A-I fada O-N-N she if it's broad, and I fada O-N-N she if it's slender. For we, it'll be A-I fada M-I-D if it's broad, and I fada M-I-D if it's slender. That'll sound like image for either one of those. Y'all would be A-I fada O-N-N shiv if it's broad, and I fada O-N-N shiv if it's slender. They would be A-I fada O-N-N shid if it's broad, and I fada O-N-N shid if it's slender. Again, notice that for I and we have synthetic forms there, and we don't need a personal pronoun to go along with the verb form because it's contained within that suffix. To add an extra personal pronoun would be redundant. So let's do a few examples. What if I want to say, I admit? Well, to admit is adwi. We form the stem by dropping AIGH. We're left with ADMH. That's the stem. The last and only vowel in that stem is A, which is a broad vowel, which makes the whole verb a broad verb. So we'll end up choosing from the list of broad suffixes. So I admit, we'll add A, I fada M, and it'll become adwim. What if we want to say we affirm? Well, to affirm is jevni. So we're going to drop the IGH in that. We're left with DEIMHN. That's the stem. The last vowel in that's an I, which is slender, which makes the whole verb a slender verb. So we're going to choose from the list of slender suffixes. We need the I fada MID suffix, which would make we affirm jevnimage. What if I want to say you answer? Well, to answer is fragger, which is one of those syncopated verbs. The last two consonants in fragger is G and R, G and R, and we'll need to get rid of the A and I in between them to syncopate. That will leave us with a stem consisting of F-R-E-A-G-R. The last vowel in that is an A, which means that the whole verb is a broad verb, and we'll need to choose from the broad list of suffixes. So you answer will be fragrian to. And remember that if the subject of your sentence ends up being something other than one of these personal pronouns that I have listed, such as a person like Siobhan or an object like the table, well, the verb will still take the same endings as these, and you'll just replace the personal pronoun with the new subject. Now, there are a few verbs that break the rule about syncopation, and it said that they resist syncopation. So you can see I've got my little syncopation resistance guy there, and he's resisting the syncopation. And these verbs will see little to no change from root to stem. So we've got frastal, to attend, tastil, to travel, ahrish, to recite, tarring, to pull, twirling, to descend, fulling, to endure, and fulum, to learn. So except with frastal and tastil, none of these are going to change at all from root to stem. With frastal, it does change just a little bit, only the I is dropped, and it goes from frastal to frastal. Tastil, to travel, it does change, but it resists syncopation so good it gets longer, and it changes from T-A-I-S-T-I-L to T-A-I-S-T-E-A-L. Even though these verbs resist syncopation, they're still second conjugation verbs, and they will take those same endings that we talked about a few minutes ago. They just won't syncopate to form the stem. And just like last time, questions in Irish are going to trigger uru in the verb. Uru is uru is the Irish word for eclipses. So let's give an example. Jevnian she affirms. But if we ask, does she affirm, that changes to a Nevnian she. N is the special buddy letter for D, so it's the uru, and we place it in front of the D, and its sound takes over or eclipses the original initial sound of the word. But L, M, N, R, S, and vowels do not ever take an uru. I messed up in the last video, and I didn't include M on that list, but I should have, so I'm gonna fix my notes on that I put on my Instagram to reflect the real list. So for example, Osclean she opens, and an Osclean she, does she open? Osclean starts with an O, which means it does not take an uru. And negative statements trigger shavu, which is the Irish word for lenition, meaning that we add an H after the initial consonant of the word and it will soften the sound. For example, fragriantu, you answer. Well, ni ragriantu, you don't answer. We added an H after the F. In Irish, the FH combination is silent, so it would be ragrian, ni ragriantu, you don't answer. But L, N, R, and vowels do not take a shavu. So for example, adwiantu, you admit. Ni adwiantu, you don't admit. Nothing happened to it because it starts with a vowel. I told you that'd be an easier one. So I hope this was helpful, and just like last time, I'm going to publish my study notes on my Instagram page, so check me out there, and like and subscribe, and do whatever you do on dang social media. Bye! Chief of Maribel Shiv, y'all, Salon.